أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك سوط عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن. صدق الله العلي العظيم. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Every time around this time every year, as we start to wrap up gradually and slowly the majalis of Muharram, it's good to spend a few minutes reflecting and looking back at those blessed nights and days that we spent in Muharram and ask ourselves, how did we do in these days? Did we learn new things? Are there new things that we wanted to improve, or just another majlis that we attended? And personally, one of the things that I really reflect upon, and I do remember with everything happening at the same time during the month of Muharram, with what's happening back home to our brothers and sisters, one of the things that really resonated to me the most this Muharram is a statement by Imam Husayn alayhi salam, when he said, "To me, death is nothing but happiness, and living under tyrants is nothing but living in a hell." So this is probably explains how our brothers and sisters who had to endure a lot still stand up and still victorious and still know how to live in dignity and die with dignity. So we ask Allah to keep us on the right path of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, and we ask Allah to accept all your amal in this holy month of Muharram. Tonight, before we continue our program, I have a couple announcements. Tomorrow we have a bonfire, community bonfire, not only for the youth, for the whole family. Please bring your family. Come with for some QA questions with Samahat Sayyid tomorrow 8 or 9:20. I think we have a salat right after the salat, inshallah. And we also have next Saturday, August 3rd, 5 p.m., we have our 3rd annual cemetery cleanup. It's a service day that we all go clean up the cemetery on the Plymouth. So bring your family and participate in this service day. Tonight we have a special guest, special speaker, brother Dr. Sadik Kassim. First of all, when you see Dr. Sadik for the first time, like I did today, the first thing come to mind is, I've seen this person somewhere. And then it takes you a couple of seconds to figure out that he looks a lot like Hajj Ahmed Vatandaus and his son Ali Rida, mashallah, and their cousins. That's probably why. So Dr. Sadik Kassim is a scientist, an executive with extensive experience in biotechnology industry, with a specific focus on cell and gene therapy, bioprocessing, and translational research. He completed his PhD in viral immunology. He has many registered innovations and publications, and currently serves as Chief Scientist or Chief Scientific and Technology Officer of Genomic Medicines for the Life Sciences Companies at Donner Corporation. Dr. Kassim is based in Boston and has been involved with the community and interfaith activities for the last 20 years. He has lectured at Muslim, Jewish, Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu organizations across the country, as well as universities such as Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and many more. MashaAllah, very impressive. Now, please help me welcome Dr. Kassim with Allah salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. لقد جاءت رسل ربنا بالحق ونودوا أن تلكم الجنة ورثتموها بما كنتم تعملون. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا ورسولنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه الغر الميامين. السلام على الحسين، السلام على علي بن الحسين، السلام على أولاد الحسين، السلام على أصحاب الحسين. يقول الله في المحكم بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Please pleasant this gathering with a loud salawat for Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Thank you, Hassan. So it's been a little over 2 weeks since we commemorated the events of Ashura, and it's that period between Ashura and Arba'in, and I think it's a period where we can reflect on what is it, the outcome of Ashura, and what exactly was the fruit of the outcome of Ashura. And I think it's an important question because, as all of you know, Ashura was only a battle that took place in Karbala for a few hours, but the real impact of Ashura did not occur until after the events of Karbala. And so tonight I want to analyze the practical impact of Ashura, the events of Karbala, and specifically some of the practical fruits of the events of Karbala and how we can implement them both in an individual basis, in our own lives, in our families, and in our communities. And so the discussion will take place in 3 parts. In the beginning, I want to reflect on the overall motive of the events of Ashura. Just remind ourselves, why did Imam Husayn alayhi salam go to Karbala and oppose the army of Yazid and his generals? Second question, the linkage with the reformation of Imam Husayn and the reformation of the Prophet. Because Imam Husayn alayhi salam reminds us that Ashura was simply a continuation of the legacy of his father, the Prophet, and of his father, the Imam, and his grandfather, the Prophet. So second, really, we want to connect the events of Ashura with the events and the reformation of the Prophet and the Imam. And then the third part, talking about one of the practical fruits or the outcomes of Ashura and Karbala, the document, which is a beautiful document, a really revolutionary document that was produced by his son, Imam Zainul Abidin, a document called Risalat al-Huquq, which is an important document, not just for the Muslim community, not just for the followers of Imam Husayn, but I think a real important lesson for non-Muslims and Muslims alike. So we'll divide the discussion into 3 parts. In the first part, Imam Husayn alayhi salam, as he was leaving Medina, he was, he had a discussion with his half-brother. And as you know, his half-brother was an individual named Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, who was based in Medina. This was Imam Husayn's half-brother. And he was encouraging Imam Husayn to not go to Karbala. He said, the people of Kufa are going to turn against you. It's going to cause bloodshed. The people will be opposed against you. And he encouraged his half-brother, Imam Husayn, to not go to Kufa. Imam Husayn alayhi salam responded to Ibn al-Hanafiya with some really powerful words that all of us hear on a regular basis at the minbar, but I don't think we reflect on them deeply. He tells his brother, وَإِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلْبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي, that the only reason that I'm going is not to cause bloodshed, not to cause instability, but this word, طَلْبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي, to seek islah. And islah is a really interesting word. The root word of islah, salaha. Salaha means to correct or to make perfect. It's the opposite of fasada. So salaha is the opposite of fasada. And the word, say, salih comes from the root word salaha. So an individual who's salih is someone who tries to perfect or tries to implement some positive change in a community. And I think, so it's a really interesting concept that Imam Husayn alayhi salam tells his half-brother, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلْبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّةِ جَدِّي. I only seek the reformation and the implementation of the good things, not in my community. This isn't my own personal fight. It's not something that I seek a political position or a government position, but this is the legacy. I'm seeking reformation and perfection in the community of my grandfather, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he says, في أمتي جدي صلى الله عليه وآله أريد أن أأمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر. I want to command the good and I want to oppose the evil or the negative. وأسير بسيرة جدي وأبي علي. And I want to go in the path of my grandfather and my father. جدي وأبي علي عليه السلام. صلوات. وعلى محمد وعلى محمد. So Imam Husayn alayhi salam is level setting the objective of his travel to Kufa. It's number one, to implement good and implement perfection. And the second objective is to reorient the community towards the message of the Prophet and the message of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So this triggers two important questions. Number one, what was the message and what was the way, the path? Sirata Jaddi wa Abi Ali. When Imam Husayn alayhi salam says, I want to reorient the community back to the path of my father and my grandfather, first question becomes, what was that path? Second question becomes, how did Imam Husayn, how did the Prophet and Imam Ali alayhi salam implement the Reformation? How did the Prophet and Imam Ali alayhi salam implement their Reformation during their time? Because I think it's an important question. If you look at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his ba'tha, his formal part of his messengerhood was 23 years. But a majority of it, 13 years, was in Mecca, where he was simply telling people about the message of Islam and the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the actual formative period where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam teaches the ummah what we would call the fiqh issues like salat, som, hajj, only occurred during the last part of his ba'tha. So the Prophet ﷺ didn't come from day one and say, okay, now you should follow the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do salat, som, hajj. This was something that was incremental. And in fact, the mission statement of the Prophet was beautifully summarized in Surah Al-Jum'ah. Tomorrow's Jum'ah, the day of Friday. So I highly recommend it to read Surah Al-Jum'ah. It's a beautiful surah, because it articulates the path for a community, but also it beautifully summarizes the biography of the Prophet in one ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Jum'ah says, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَإِنْ كَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. So the Reformation that the Prophet implemented was really a four-step process. First step, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ مِنْهُمْ. So the Prophet was sent from among a community of believers. He wasn't a foreign entity. He wasn't someone that was unknown to the community. He was someone who was known to the community and was someone who was from among them, elevated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. The first step was to recite the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these signs are the things that reorient humanity towards their connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِي بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. We shall reveal to them the signs in the outer expanses of the universe. سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ, meaning the furthest distances of the galaxy. وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, and in their own selves, حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ, until it becomes clear that this is the path of truth. And this is interesting because here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the word haqq synonymously with the path of Allah. And so when someone asks you, give me one word synonym, how do you describe Islam? The word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly uses throughout the Quran is the word haqq. سنريهم آياتنا في الآفاق وفي أنفسهم حتى يتبين لهم أنه الحق. وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. So it's interesting. The word here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to describe. He doesn't say حَتَّى يَتَبَيْنَ لَهُمْ الْإِسْلَامِ, so that it's revealed to them that Islam is the true path, or حَتَّى يَتَبَيْنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the truth. But rather the truth here, the fact of the nature of our existence and the fact that we're connected to this universe, that's the ultimate connection between our submission and the universe of the submission, and that's the universal truth that everything is submissive to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first step of the prophetic mission was recognizing and reawakening within people themselves the nature of their existence, and that their existence is, number one, connected to the universe, but ultimately is connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another way to think of the haqq, so when you think of it in that framework, that everything is connected to the universe and everything ultimately bows down to Allah, and that's the haqq. The haqq is that we're all independent of everything except for that which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the fundamental message of Islam. It's not salat, som, zakat, hajj, khumus. Those are tools to enable you to connect to that haqq. The fundamental reality of Islam is that you're a part of this creation and you yourself are subservient to nothing other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is an important message because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet. Remember the Prophet, when he went to Medina, he was part of a mixed community of Jews, polytheists, pagans, among others. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet how to dialogue with people of other faiths. He says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. He's telling here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet, قُلْ, meaning, O Prophet, tell the people of the book. So this is an important lesson for us. How do we talk to people that are not necessarily members of our own faith? How do we talk and dialogue and discuss important issues with them? Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us a framework of how to discuss the haqq, how to discuss the truth with those that are not necessarily of the same religious background or of the same theological disposition. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. Tell the people of the book, O Prophet, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. Come, let us unite under a common word. Look, he's looking to encourage unity and this connection with people of other faiths. So the prophetic message or the prophetic style is first and foremost to bring people together under a big tent. قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ. He doesn't aim to divide and say, you're wrong, we're right, and you're damned to go to Jahannam. But rather, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ. Come, let us unite under a common word. What is that common word? أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. That we worship or we submit to none other than Allah, وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا, and that we commit no association or no partnership with Him. And وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. And this is the important ayah. وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. And that we are not subservient. We do not bow down to anything. أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. Meaning arbab is kind of like a mini, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called Rabb al-Alameen. Rabb comes from this concept of Allah raises us, like a murabbi. A murabbi is someone who raises you. Rabb al-Alameen is the one who created you, but also raises you to your full potential. Now, arbab are false gods. These are people that claim to have the same authority over you as Allah, arbab. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, do not bow down to those false individuals that make you convinced that you're subservient to them. وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ فَإِنْ تَوَلَّوْا فَقُولُوا أَشْهَدُ بِأَنَّا مُسْلِمُونَ. And if they turn away, say that I bear witness that we are Muslims. We are subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We submit to none other than Allah. This is a beautiful ayah because here this is emphasizing the point of haqq. The concept of haqq is based on truth. But that truth, what is that truth? The truth is that you were created independent and subservient to no other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second truth related to that is the definition of Muslim is we submit to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. no mini-gods who come and claim authority over you, no false gods who claim to be your sustainers or your enablers, but rather we submit to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is an important point, because once you recognize that Allah is the source of sustenance, that Allah is the murabbi, that Allah is the ultimate source of Rabbaniyah, meaning the one who raises you, then you, in your own political authority, have to be aware of the right of other individuals, so that when you govern them, you do not deny that basic fundamental human right of their existence, you see? Because when you recognize that everyone is created with that haqq of being subservient to only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then if you're in a position of authority and leadership, like the Prophet ﷺ was, then you recognize that your leadership extends not just to the Muslims of your community, but it extends to every member of your community. And implementing this, the Prophet ﷺ did some very beautiful practical things. And we don't have time to go into all of them, but one of them that I want to bring to your attention is this document which the Prophet ﷺ implemented upon the migration from Mecca to Medina. So as you know, the migration from Mecca to Medina was upon the invitation of the Aus and the Khazraj. These were two tribes that were quarreling with each other in Medina. And they invited the Prophet as a mediator to commit islah, or to sulh, meaning, going back to this word islah, to commit a treaty between these two communities. So the Prophet migrates from Mecca to Medina, and in Medina, the people of Aus and Khazraj, they say to the Prophet, we now want you to be our leader. The Prophet had an interesting mandate here, because the community in Medina was a mixed population of the Ansar, which were the people in Medina, the Aus and the Khazraj, who pledged their allegiance to the Prophet. Then you had the migrants, the Muhajirun. Then you had the population in Medina, the Yahud, the many different tribes of the Jewish tribes. So the Prophet could have gone in there and just pulled a political move, allied himself with the Ansar who wanted him to be there, and he could have just completely eliminated anyone who was not part of the Ansar. But he did the opposite, recognizing that everyone in the city of Medina was born on the foundation of haqq, that haqq being that they are subservient to no other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that they have a basic element of human dignity. One of the first things that the Prophet did was this document called Sahifatul Medina, what's been translated as the Constitution of Medina, although it's not really a constitution in the sense that we think of it as a political document, but it's really a agreement between the Prophet and between the community within Medina. And it's a beautiful document. I'll just read some of this to you. This was a document of how the different communities were going to engage with each other. So the Prophet ﷺ starts off with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Again, orienting the community that what I'm doing here is not in my name, not Bismillah Muhammad ibn Abdullah, but Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, meaning this is coming from a foundation of divine inspiration. It's not out of political aspiration, a very important point. هذا كتاب بين محمد النبي وبين المؤمنين والمسلمين من قريش وأهل يثرب. This is an agreement between Muhammad, the Prophet, and the people of Yathrib, Medina, and the people of Quraysh, meaning the Muhajirun. وَمَنْ أَتْبَعَهُمْ فَلَحَقَ بِهُمْ وَجَاهَدَ مَعَهُم. And whoever is with them will struggle and fight with them. This is an important point. إِنَّهُمْ أُمَّةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ مِنْ دُونِ النَّاسِ. They are a unified ummah outside of the entire community. So he brought the migrants, he brought the natives, united them together into a single unified community. Look at this language that the Prophet was using and compare it and contrast it to the language of many modern politicians in Europe and in the US who try to divide the natives and the migrants from each other, saying the migrants are coming and ruining our communities and the natives are losing out on jobs. I want you to look at this language through the lens of modern contemporary political discourse. Whether it's in France or in Germany or in the United States, oftentimes migrants are attacked and the natives are compelled as being of an elevated status. Here the Prophet completely overturns this concept on its head, and he says, "Innahum ummatun wahida min dun nas." These migrants and these natives of Medina are truly one community, united, not divided. But this is where it becomes really more interesting, because he doesn't just focus on the interests of the ummah. He also talks about the multiple Jewish tribes that were in Medina. وَإِنَّ الْيَهُودِ يَنْفِقُونَ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ مَا دَامُوا مُحَارِبِينَ. And the Jews of Medina will be part of this community as long as they're willing to participate and to struggle with the mu'mins. وَإِنَّ يَهُودَ بَنِي عَوْفٍ أُمَّةٌ مَعَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ الْيَهُودِ دِينَهُمْ لَهُمْ دِينَهُمْ لِلْيَهُودِ دِينَهُمْ وَلِلْمُسْلِمِينَ دِينَهُمْ. And this is the important concept. وَإِنَّ يَهُودَ بَنِي عَوْفٍ, so the tribe of Bani Auf, this Jewish tribe, are an ummah, ummatun ma'al mu'minin. He doesn't say that these are enemies of the mu'mins. He says these are just like the muhajirun and the ansar. لِلْيَهُودِ دِينَهُمْ وَلِلْمُسْلِمِينَ دِينَهُمْ. They have this intrinsic right to practice their religion, and we have an intrinsic right to practice our own religion. And this is such a revolutionary document that many people, particularly in modern times where the political discourse is very charged, they try to create these false divisions between Muslims and Jews. And oftentimes they turn to the Quran and they say, look, this is an anti-Semitic ayah, or this is an ayah that's talking against the Jews. There's actually an interesting book by a professor at Hebrew University named Mar Bar Asher. He's an interesting scholar at Hebrew University, Jewish by background, and has written quite a bit of deep scholarship on the Quran and on the tafsir of the Ahlul Bayt. Really fascinating. I mean, it's really interesting how deep he goes into this. He has a book called Jews and the Quran. And in this book, he talks about a lot of people use ayahs out of context and say, look, the Muslims here are anti-Semitic. He says the reality is these ayahs had a very specific context and a very specific political situation that was being discussed. The Quran in of itself is not an anti-Semitic book, and in fact, the reformations that were implemented during the time of the Prophet were extremely progressive, both during that time and during today. So I think it's an important point to remember. And this is, the point that we're trying to make here is that the governance of the Prophet, when he came into power, was based on this intrinsic belief that everyone was born on this foundation of haqq, truth. And that foundation of haqq means that they're subservient to no other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the primary role of the Prophet as a leader is not to come and take over the rights of individuals, but rather to create an environment where these individuals of the community can reach their maximum potential, their God-given right to be free. And this is such a beautiful hadith from the Prophet that all of you have probably heard, and I think is worth going deeper into. The Prophet says, "Kullukum ra'." All of you are caretakers. Kullukum ra'. وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٍ عَلَى رَاعِهِ. So all of you are being taken care of, and all of you are caretakers. So the Prophet divides, every role that you have as either someone who's being taken care of or someone who's responsible for taking care of others. وَكُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ غَيْرَهِ. Okay, وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَلَى رَعِيَّتِهِ. الْإِمَامِ رَاعٍ وَمَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. So the Imam, Sayyid Salih here, is responsible for the congregation, the people who are listening to him. وَالرَّجُلْ رَاعٍ فِي أَهْلِهِ وَمَسْئُولٍ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. And the man, the husband, is responsible for his the people that he takes care of and his family. وَالْمَرْأَةُ رَاعِيَةٌ فِي بَيْتِ زَوْجِهَا وَمَسْئُولَةٍ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهَا. And the woman, the female, the wife, is also responsible for taking care of everyone in that same household. وَالْخَادِمْ رَاعٌ فِي مَالِ سَيِّدِهِ. And the servant, or the one who works for an ujra or compensation, is responsible for being taking care of their master or their boss's responsibility. فَكُلُّكُمْ رَاعٍ وَمَسْئُولٍ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ. So all of you are being taken care of, are individuals that need care and need that nurturing environment. But importantly, all of you also have that responsibility of being caretakers. So it's an interesting binary division of our roles. And think about it in every role that you occupy. As a daughter or as a son, the individuals who take care of you are your mother and father during your early period of life. But if you have a younger brother or sister, you're responsible for taking care of them. And the individuals that took care of you when you were young, your mother and father, they're the individuals that you will take care of when you're older. And so it's this beautiful cycle of being taken care of when you're young, taking care of others when you're older. It's this continuous virtuous cycle. This is what the Prophet is reminding us of. So the reason that I bring this up is once you recognize the role of every individual as being free and every individual as being ultimately subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you have a position of authority, if you have a position of responsibility, this is a position that you need to take very seriously, because you are being evaluated and you are being, this is the way that you will be evaluated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But importantly, the way that you take care of individuals is the same way that you will be taken care of as well. So this virtuous cycle. So, and the second point here is that ultimately these individuals that take care of you or that you take care of, these are a responsibility from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have their own huquq, they have their own rights and responsibilities. And those huquq and rights and responsibilities are based on that foundational haqq. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. That haqq is that everyone is born subservient to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when Imam Husayn alayhi salam tells his half-brother Ibn al-Hanafiya, وَإِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلْبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ فِي أُمَّتِي جَدِّي صلى الله عليه وآله وأريد أن أمر بالمعروف وأنهى عن المنكر وأسير بسيرة جدي وأبي علي. Imam Husayn alayhi salam is saying, look, I'm just taking care of this legacy of my grandfather, who when he was in a position of authority took care of everyone who was both Muslim and non-Muslim and allowed everyone to live a life of freedom and independence without force and without oppression. Imam Ali alayhi salam, salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Imam Husayn alayhi salam continues in this spirit of being raised in this type of an environment with Imam Ali alayhi salam. Imam Ali alayhi salam has some really beautiful quotes. And you know, it's interesting because I think Imam Ali alayhi salam has some of the most beautiful and pithy and impactful quotes ever. But I think those sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam, they're pretty much isolated very much in our communities. I think an opportunity for us is to really disseminate the sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam on things like social media, on things like T-shirts, wears, because these are just intrinsically beautiful quotes that I think appeal to the very nature of individuals. And here's a few quotes where Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about mankind's fundamental nature. أيها الناس إن آدم لم يلد عبدا ولا أما وإن الناس كلهم أحرار. O mankind, here he's talking to the community. Says Adam, meaning your forefather, Prophet Adam alayhi salam, لم يلد عبدا ولا أما, did not give birth to a slave or to a servant. وإن الناس كلهم أحرار. And all individuals are born on a foundation of freedom, أحرار. That hurriya is the haqq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَهَقَ الْبَاطِلُ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Or the ayah to Ahlul Kitab, وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ. These are all connected. The haqq relates to the freedom of submission to none other than Allah. لا تكونن عبد غيرك وقد جعلك الله سبحانه حرا. This is Imam Ali alayhi salam. Do not sell yourself into servitude. Do not become a servant or a slave of someone else where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made you free. So Imam Husayn alayhi salam was raised on a foundation of haqq from the Quran that was given to the Prophet, implemented practically in the community of Medina, raised on a foundation of this foundation of liberty and haqq coming from Imam Ali alayhi salam. And therefore it's no surprise on the day of Karbala, when he's talking to the opposite side, the way that he dialogues with them, he says, "In lam yakun lakum deen." Look, I'm not here to tell you about religion. I'm not here to tell you to pray 5 times a day. I'm not here to appeal to you to go to Hajj, to do zakat, to give khumuz. That's not how I'm talking with you. In lam yakun lakum deen. I don't care. You don't worship Allah, that's your situation. That's not something that I'm going to force you to do. In lam yakun lakum deen. Wa kuntum la takhafun al-ma'ad. And even if you don't believe in the concept of the hereafter, and you have no connection with the hereafter, وَلَا تَخَافُونَ الْمَعَادِ فَكُونُوا أَحْرَارًا فِي دُنْيَاكُمْ. Be free individuals in your own life. So what Imam Husayn alayhi salam was saying is, why have you sold yourselves into servitude of the army of Yazid for a few pennies, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you as free individuals? Imam Husayn alayhi salam is reminding the opposite side of their intrinsic worth and their intrinsic value as free individuals. وَقُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَزَاقَ الْبَاطِلَ إِنَّ الْبَاطِلَ كَانَ زَهُوقًا. Reminding them, you don't need to, I'm not here to tell you to do salat 5 times a day, or to go to Hajj, or to give khumuz. I'm here to remind you of your intrinsic value as a human, that you are subservient to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a powerful message. So ultimately, this spirit of sacrifice was a principled stand to demonstrate to individuals the potential of freedom. Now, practically, how was this reformation continued? You know, we go back to this ayah from Surah Al-Jum'ah. Remember how the Prophet's message was implemented. هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَإِنْ كَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. The Prophet's message, to implement it, was a 4-stage process. Stage 1, reciting to them the ayat. The ayah, one of those fundamental ayahs or signs of Allah, is to remind individuals of their intrinsic freedom and their intrinsic liberty. الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. That's step 1. But that's not sufficient. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. And he purifies them. He teaches them the method for self-purification. وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ. And he teaches them the book and the wisdom. وَإِنْ كَانُوا مِنْ قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ. And before that, they were led astray. Karbala, Ashura, was step 1. This was the ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. The sacrifice of Imam Husayn was an ayah that was meant to shock the Muslim community that had deviated from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the subsequent steps were all implemented by Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, by Sayyidah Ruqayya alayhi salam, and by Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, and then subsequently by the Imams. And the way they did this practically is they reminded people of the book in a practical way, and they reminded people of their rights as given, as granted to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because remember, people had forgotten about their rights. They had enabled Banu Umayyah to come in and to oppress them and to make them subservient to the community. Imam Zainul Abidin's task now, Imam al-Baqir's task now, Sayyidah Zainab's task now, was to reorient people to the reality of their haqq, the reality of their truth, and reminding them of their rights as individuals. And so, you know, in the final few minutes before we close out here, one of the practical documents that I think is worth reflecting, and that's a practical outcome of Karbala and the day of Ashura, is a document called the Risalat al-Huquq, or the document of rights. And it's interesting because the word right, which is huquq, comes from the root word haqq, haqqa, truth. So your rights are based on an intrinsic truth. Your rights are not granted to you by a government or by a political organization. Your rights are fundamentally given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that haqq of being subservient to none other than Allah. So one of the first things that Imam Zainul Abidin reminds the community of is their rights and responsibilities as individuals. And this is an important point, particularly in the modern context. When you know your rights, when you know your responsibilities, no one can take away your freedom from you, because you're going to fight for your rights and for your responsibilities. But if you don't know what your rights are, someone can come in and can completely take them away from you. So Imam Zainul Abidin wanted to awaken the community. These are your rights. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from you, but this is your expectation for as an individual in the community. And it's a beautiful document. You know, it contains 50 rights altogether. And the way that it's divided is to 5 sections. The first section, Huquq Allah, where Imam Zainul Abidin reminds us that all of our rights are derived not from a government, not from a document, but ultimately from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So first, recognize your right to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Second section is Huquq al-Af'al, or Huquq al-Af'al, which is the rights of the deeds. So what are the rights of going to Hajj? What are the rights of giving charity? Third section is Haqqul A'imma, or the rights of the leaders. Fourth section, rights of subjects, Huquq al-Ra'iyya. Fifth section is Huquq al-Raham, or the rights of your relatives. And the longest section, the sixth section, is the rights of others, or Huquq al-Akharin. Now, why is this a revolutionary document? This document was produced immediately after the events of Karbala. And just to frame it in a contemporary context, there's a universal document called the International Declaration of Human Rights. This was a document that was produced after World War II in response to the injustices and atrocities that were committed during World War II. So the United Nations collectively, across many governments, came together, put together a document in 1948 articulating the rights of individuals as humans as part of the global community. Now, in the first document, the first iteration of the document in 1948, they overlooked the rights of women. So they had to amend the International Treaty on Human Rights in 1953 to include the rights of women. Then they noticed that they overlooked the rights of children. Rights of children were not included. So then in 1989, they had to amend it to include the rights of children. And so it's interesting because here you have a political document that initially was focused only on the rights of men, then the rights of women, then the rights of children, but it was an evolving document. This, by contrast, was a divinely inspired document. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inspiring Imam Zainul Abidin to remind people that your rights, first and foremost, don't come from the United Nations. They don't come from the United States. They don't come from Lebanon or Iraq or a king or a governor or a president. These rights are intrinsic to you as an individual. You're practically born. But knowing your rights will enable you to fight and defend for your rights. If you don't know what rights you have, how can you defend them? So Imam Zainul Abidin is reminding the community, these are your rights as individuals. And I'll just read 2 of those rights because I think they're fundamentally important. And then we'll close it off, inshallah. The first right that Imam Zainul Abidin mentions is the fact that, you know, your rights are derived from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَمَّا حَقُّ اللَّهُ الْأَكْبَرُ فَإِنَّكَ تَعْبُدُهُ لَا تُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا فإذا فعلت ذلك بإخلاص جعل لك على نفسه أن يكفيك أمر الدنيا والآخرة ويحفظ لك ما تحب منهما. Your first right is to recognize that your life, قل إن صلاتي ونسكي ومحياي ومماتي, your life, your livelihood, your personal life, your professional life, if you dedicate these to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to serving the community in the name of Allah, then and you do this with sincerity, with ikhlas, meaning not riyah. You're not doing these so that so-and-so says, wow, this is a good person, or so that so-and-so says this is a good person. But you do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with sincerity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you sufficiency, will make you independent of everything and everyone that is not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a powerful statement. This is essentially your declaration of independence. When you're making salat, This is a declaration of independence that you bow down to no other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you do this with sincerity and ikhlas. Allah will give you the strength and the fortitude and the rizq to continue this throughout your life. The final right that I want to just mention, I think this is worthwhile. You know, every family should have this. Everyone should read this. 50 rights, very accessible language. You know, sometimes the Quran, people don't understand the Quran because they have to read tafsir. It's not very accessible sometimes, the language. Here, very basic language. I would say 5th or 6th grade level. Anyone can understand this. And it's very deep in terms of the meaning. The final right that I'll just mention here, because I think it's the beauty of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, is the right of the one who wrongs you. And I'm just going to summarize it. I'm not going to read it in Arabic. But here it's amma haqqu man sa'aka, the one who wrongs you. Let's say someone insults you. Let's say someone physically pushes you or takes a right away from you. How should we deal with them? Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam says that the best thing is to forgive them. But if you do want to take your right, let's say someone has abused you or has slandered you or whatever, first you have to ask yourself, what was the intent behind that ill action? So don't go immediately attacking them, but ask, why did this individual commit this error? And if they did it out of ghafla, meaning they were unaware that this was causing harm to you, then it's better for you to forgive them, because you don't want to respond to a wrong with added wrong if you don't know that that person actually intended to do it. But if the person did intend to do it, ultimately it's better for you to forgive them. So I think this is beautiful, because here Imam Zainul Abidin witnessed the greatest tragedy in history, the sacrifice and the massacre of his father, his brothers, his family, his relatives, and yet he was able to go above and beyond that and write a document that was very intentional and still not neglectful of individuals' rights. So to conclude, I think one of the practical lessons of Ashura for us to reflect on between now and Arba'een is the fact that this Ashura only occurred over a few hours, and it was really meant to be a shock to the system, an ayah, to reawaken humanity to their fundamental liberty, that haqqul ja'al haqq wa zaqal batil. But the real reformation that was triggered by Ashura actually took place over the many decades after the Battle of Karbala. And it was enabled by the du'as of Al-Sahifa Sajjadiyya, the speeches of Sayyidah Zainab, but practically the lessons of Risalat al-Huquq. And moving forward, it's a great opportunity for us to both internalize this lesson at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, and at a society level. And final point that I'll make here, I think of the beautiful thing here that I heard from the announcements, this activity of cleaning the cemetery. I think this is the way that you sustain and build a community. It's not having people just coming in and lecturing. You know, all of us have heard lectures. A lot of these lectures are available online. You can easily access content. But it's implementing the lessons of these lectures in your local community. And I think also looking at the rights of those that are overlooked in your community. And oftentimes we overlook the rights of those that came before us, the al-marhumin. We oftentimes, after we bury them, we neglect them or we rarely visit the grave. And I think what better right to show the strength of the community by not just commemorating the death of Imam Husayn, but also commemorating and elevating those that have died in your own community that have set the foundation. So may Allah reward you and bless you for that effort of cleaning the cemetery. I encourage all of you to go to that event and to continue with many of these events, because this is how you build that Husayni community and not that superficial community based on رياء. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا واخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. صلوات.